board meeting of the Board of Education for April 13th, 2021 is called to order. For tonight's meeting, any item that will be voted on has been posted on the PPS website under the Board and Meetings tabs. This meeting is being live streamed on PPS TV Services website and on Channel 28 and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the district website for replay times. It's a wonderful spring evening tonight. I looked at the temperature at one point. It was 64 degrees outside. So I think we're all ready for this season change and the new life that's showing up around us as we see school buses in our community again. We see those blinking yellow lights reminding us to go 20 in school zones, and we see students returning to our buildings. And as the parent of a high schooler, I'm very excited as high school begins in-person instruction this next week. So we have a lot to cover tonight, as always, with the good work we're doing as a district. But we're going to begin with our board consent agenda. Board members, if there are any items you would like to pull, we will set those aside for discussion and vote after we consider the rest of the consent agenda. Ms. Powell, are there any changes to the consent agenda?
There is not.
Board members, are there any items you would like to pull from the consent agenda?
Yes, I'd like to have a poll, sounds too strong, but a discussion about the 2021-22 inter-district transfer resolution.
Yeah. So we'll go ahead and take that off the consent agenda. It's such weird language, you're right, Director Brim-Edwards, but we will consider that separately and have a conversation about it.
It sounds too dramatic.
We need a better verb there. Yes. Any other items to pull? Okay, do I have a motion and a second to adopt the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
So Director Brim-Edwards moves and Director Constant seconds the adoption of the consent agenda. Is there any board discussion on the consent agenda with resolution, I have to find it, 6283 removed? So we will not be discussing that at this time. Any discussion of the other resolutions? Ms. Powell, is there any public comment? All right, the board will now vote on resolutions 6278 through 6281, and then 6283 through 6285. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
I can, before we go, can we revisit? Can we revisit the numbers that were recited on the resolutions? I think the one that was pulled is 6283.
Yes,
That's
did I say it wrong?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I apologize.
There we go.
6283, I apologize. So we are voting on resolutions 6278 through 6282, and then 6284 and 6285. Did I manage to say all of them the last time? Great, good, okay. Thank you for catching that. That is what we're voting on. We have removed 6283. All right, we'll vote again on the correct items. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 Yeah.
Yes.
All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? The consent agenda is approved by a vote of 7-0 with Student Representative Shu voting.
Yes.
Director Brim-Edwards, would you like to begin the discussion of resolution 6? We need to
You want to get it on the table?
Yes, we need to bring it on the table.
So moved.
So thank you. So 6283, Director Brim-Edwards moves. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Director Bailey. So Director Brim-Edwards moves and Director Bailey seconds 6283. And Director Brim-Edwards, would you like to begin our discussion tonight?
Yes, I had some questions, and I really appreciate staff providing some answers, but I thought because not only because we've received some communications in the last couple of days around these, but also during the Southeast Guiding Coalition conversation, there were discussions about transfers. So I just had some questions that I wanted to get on the record, and I'll direct them to the superintendent, and you can field them how you wish. So the first one was in the staff report. There is a discussion about ODE staff looking at Black family displacement and the interdistrict transfer process, but that the efforts are on hold. And I'm wondering if you can share what that process is and how it relates to the action that we took in the fall of 2017 for the right to return to Albina, whether it's complementary or in supporting that.
I appreciate the question, Director Brim Edwards. Roseanne, if you could, Judy and Claire, if you don't mind flipping on your cameras, and hopefully directors saw that we tried to capture questions we were hearing from the broader community, and you had a chance to see some of staff responses here, but I think it is important to sort of make sure we're explicit about some of the questions. So on this question around displacement or process, can you speak to that, Claire or Judy?
Please go ahead, Judy.
Good evening, Directors Judy Brennan, Enrollment and Transfer. Yes, this is an effort that ODE took on and was just starting a little bit over a year ago, and working within their focus on African American students and seeing if it also might extend to a focus on the needs of Native American students statewide. We've been reaching out to ODE and actually just got an answer back this morning. I'm working with Courtney Westling to try and stay engaged with them. And we have a discussion tomorrow morning with a staff person. It sounds like there's been a staff person changeover during the COVID. And so a new person will be taking this on. Our objective is to make sure that they understand the importance of having a streamlined process for students who have been displaced to remain in Portland schools. So that was the intent of the board in the resolution that you passed in 2017 around the return to Albina preference. The schools involved in that, specifically, it's a broader area, but these specific schools, Boise Elliott Humboldt Elementary, Harriet Tubman Middle School, Jefferson Middle College. This year, we've identified 60 students currently enrolled in those schools who will need permission from their new resident districts because they've moved out of PPS in order for their children to remain. 95% of those students are BIPOC. And that is just an indicator of how important it is that bureaucracy, paperwork, doesn't undercut the ability of families to remain connected to their communities. So we'll be meeting with ODE staff tomorrow and can provide a more thorough update once we have more information about how they're going to be reactivating that process.
So just to clarify, their current policies don't prevent us from using our Return to Albina sort of initiative that we have, but this would be more to enhance it and maybe make it statewide?
The board passed that at a time when there was an opportunity called open enrollment, where other districts couldn't deny the students' rights to transfer. Open enrollment sunset in 2018, and the state hasn't taken up any additional initiatives that would replace it. This preference or this need to remain aligned with the historic community is not part of the state's definition for a hardship in their emergency hardship exemption. So while we have very strong cooperation across our neighboring districts around the importance of this initiative, it's also something that the state laws are so broad and require blind placement. So they can't actually identify kids who would qualify for this and give them a different outcome from any other student. So that's why we were hoping that the state can support us. And in fact, it may be something that's important in other communities in the state, not just in Portland.
Great, thank you. And then another question I had was, I know when the Southeast Guiding Coalition was looking at enrollment in sort of across Southeast and Northeast, the questions came up about transfers into schools that were already overcrowded or full. And so maybe, and as I look through the materials, it looks like we have students going into Grant, Franklin, and Bridger, and just the sense of explaining if a school's full, why the district, what policy or reason we would be allowing transfers in at a time when our school is full.
Yes, so with our inter-district transfers, we try and follow the direction of the in-district transfers. We don't want students who live outside of our district to have, say, more latitude than students who live within PPS. Schools that you mentioned, such as Grant and Franklin, are closed to almost all new transfers. Please keep in mind that most of the inter-district transfers, the students that go through the standard process, are already enrolled. We're likely residents of PPS and have now moved out to another district. And we know that that's more and more, and we should expect quite a bit of this to a degree that we can't exactly understand right now, but we're anticipating a lot of movement as families are coping with the pandemic and housing instability. So most of the students that are affected are students who are already enrolled, and we're asking that they have permission to keep their seat and graduate at the school they've started in. And when we've done a deep dive into some of these schools, we find again that these are primarily BIPOC students who are affected by these changes. Regarding any new students who would be allowed in through inter-district transfer, again, we're following the same rules that we would follow with our resident transfer. While we do prioritize siblings, we ask whether they're permission of the principals. If we have any siblings, those could be denied. We also allow transfers if there's a program in the school that only exists in that school. And in the case of Franklin, that would be Russian immersion. So any students who live outside of PPS, finish 8th grade in Lane Russian immersion, have the right to continue on to Franklin, because that's the cohort that we need to keep the program stable and work for all of the kids that are supporting it. The same is true for the Japanese immersion program that feeds from Mount Tabor Middle School to Grant. Now we could make, I mean, you have the latitude as the board to direct us to close some schools completely and not allow those degrees of transfers. We would recommend against it because of the programmatic impact that it has in those cases.
Great, that's really helpful. As I say, I get a fair amount of questions of why there's transfers into schools that are crowded. And then the last question is, we've had a whole host of communications about the transfer criteria for students seeking to transfer out. And I know those communications were forwarded to you so that they're in the record. Can you explain why the criteria doesn't match and why the district is recommending we maintain the current criteria that is before us?
Sure. So one of the basic principles in PPS enrollment policies is that we believe that our schools can serve our kids' needs, and children should only change and go to different schools if there's an important reason, a hardship or a specific program that can't be met in their neighborhood schools. In the case of inter-district transfers through the standard process, the state process doesn't allow us to ask why a student would be leaving. It's simply just an open door. And because we don't allow open door for kids transfers between neighborhood schools, we don't think that it fits to allow an open door for kids to transfer out of district. Now, we do have a provision that lets students into PPS schools without a reason, because we can't ask for a reason, up to 100. I think last year we seated about 30 students, and they were only at schools that had space. Now, to be equal, we could certainly say we don't allow anyone in who doesn't meet that criteria of being a prior move, a sibling, or a student already enrolled in a program. That's what would make it equal. But we have allowed that door to remain open for a few kids where there's space, because we can't ask a reason. We don't know why they come, but we've let space be the reason that we've let them.
Great, so they either meet the criteria or up to 100.
Yes.
Okay.
Space availability, 100 in the district, but certainly would be a no at a school like Franklin, or many of our schools are too full. But where we do have space, if someone wants a seat there, we've said yes.
Great, thank you. That's all my questions. I really appreciate the answers and the explanations.
Andrew?
Yes, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. And Michelle, you had taken your mute off, and you want to go ahead?
No, I've done that 3 times. Go ahead.
Just a really quick funding question. For students who transfer in, does the funding follow the student in that case if we accept those 30 students you were talking about, or the hardship students? Is it different either way?
Yes, standard interdistrict transfer is basically a contract that moves the transfer. It's the transfer of state school funds from their home district to the receiving district.
I have a quick question about, you mentioned the right to return policy. Are you talking about the preference policy that came from the city of Portland that preferences people that were impacted by city actions to come back to Albina? Or is this a different policy?
Yeah, Director DePass, in conjunction with that policy and in coordination with several African-American leaders and Director Moore, I believe he was on the board at the time, was a board liaison. We worked to establish a right to return to schools that would parallel that city effort. So it allowed us, we used this interdistrict tool called open enrollment to identify schools through community members, did outreach, as allowed under state law, to make sure that families knew that if they wanted seats in our Portland schools, we would take the barriers down, at least the paperwork barriers, to make that happen. And that started in 2017, but then open enrollment sunset. And that's why we've been trying to stay connected and advocate for change at the state level.
Thank you. So it sounds like a different policy, but it's in alignment with the city's preference policy that preferences people within a geography to have first right of refusal for housing programs. I'm wondering if we could take a look at our policy and make sure it, is right on time in terms of looking at a policy that's kind of based around home ownership models versus higher poverty students that have quite a bit more mobility in and out of different school districts and even out of PPS and moving east. If we could align our values with any policy that has to do with enrollment that takes renters into consideration as well as homeowners, knowing what we know about the minority home ownership gap in Oregon due to the legacy of the state policy, our constitution.
Absolutely. I mean, from my seat in enrollment, absolutely. Our preference was for any students or any families with a historic connection. So similar to how the city, like you qualify for the program based on your historic connection, not necessarily home ownership. What you qualify for is often assistance with home ownership. And I know the program is expanding now, but for us, it was simply a seat in a school in Albina or other areas that are historically the center of the Black community.
That's fantastic. And I know I was on a committee with David Douglas, school board chair, I think at the time a couple of years ago, and she was actually working on developing a preference policy for David Douglas that preferenced any affordable home opportunities to those lower income people that were at risk of being pushed out even further. And I mean, she worked tirelessly on that. I'm not sure the status of it now, but it was a great idea, I thought.
Yeah, further questions, Scott?
Yes, just to be clear, without open enrollment, the return to Albina, any shift of students depends on other districts allowing that shift to happen. And I believe, as the superintendent said, we've had really good cooperation with those other districts. So just wanted to clarify that and just say thank you to our partners in other districts.
That's the case, Director Bailey. We've had that explicit conversation among the superintendents in Multnomah County, understanding the reality for many of our families, and a general pledge of support that we wouldn't get in the way of a family who needed that accommodation.
Any further questions? Ms. Powell, is there any public comment on 6283?
There is not.
All right. The board will now vote on resolution 6283. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? Resolution 6283 is approved by a vote of 7-0 with Student Representative Shu voting.
Yes.
Chair Lowry,
Yes.
can I ask that after the discussions with the state that the board get an update on where we are with that discussion?
Judy, do you have a timeline for when we think we might get that response?
And we have this initial meeting tomorrow, and again, Courtney Wessling is involved with it as well, so it could come in other updates that you're getting from her. But one way or another, we will make sure that gets to you. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. All right, we turn now to student and public comment. Before we begin, I would like to review our current guidelines for comment. We as a board thank you, the community, for taking the time to attend this meeting and provide your comments. Public input informs our work, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts, reflections, and concerns. Our responsibility as a board is to actively listen. Some of us do take notes during public comment, so just know that. Our board office may follow up on board-related issues raised during public testimony. We request that complaints about individual employees be directed to the superintendent's office as a personnel matter. If you have additional materials or items you would like to provide to the board or superintendent, we ask that you email them to publiccomment@pps.net. Please make sure when you begin your comment that you clearly state your name and spell your last name. You will have 3 minutes to speak, and you will hear a sound after 3 minutes, which means it is time to conclude your comments. Ms. Powell, do we have anyone signed up for student or public comment this evening?
We do. We have 4 people. The first person is Barbara Baines.
Welcome, Barbara.
Turn this on. Okay.
All right,
sorry.
we can hear and see you. It's okay, technology.
Thank you for having me. My name is Barbara Baines, B-A-I-N-S, and I want to just thank you for allowing me to come and speak. I joyfully serve the children of Laurelhurst Elementary School and as their lunch lady. For the last 13 months, Nutrition Services has been on the front line. We have been the face of Portland Public Schools. When we were sent home on March 13th, none of us knew what would happen. It was a few weeks of worry and fear before the governor said we were going to be paid our regular wages. Even though we were guaranteed a salary either way, there was a powerful workforce of volunteers that stepped up and continued to serve, ensuring that the children of Portland Public Schools had food to eat. In September, when it was time for all of us to come back, Imagine our surprise to find out that every single person in Portland Public Schools was guaranteed their full wage, except for us. The only people whose hours and pay were cut was nutrition services, the very people who were on the front lines, facing the public, putting ourselves and our families' health and lives on the line. Why is this? Because this is what we were told, because we're self-sufficient. Over and over again in bargaining, we've been told the reason that we're paid such low wages is because nutrition services is self-sufficient. During one of these meetings, a supervisor said nutrition services asked to be self-sufficient. When we were discussing it afterwards, several of us had heard it differently. So the next time we met, I asked for clarification. Did we ask to be self-sufficient, or were we asked to be self-sufficient? There is a difference. And no matter how many times ways I asked the question, I was never given a straight answer. The only thing I was told was, it was like that when I started. I was told that by the person that interviewed me more than 12 years ago. She's been around a while. So we've been using self-sufficiency as an excuse to treat, they've been using self-sufficiency as an excuse to treat us with inequity and disrespect. This is unacceptable. My dad used to always say, it doesn't matter how far you've gone in the wrong direction, you still have to turn around. I think it's time to turn around. What we're asking for is so much less than what we deserve. Equity would mean retro pay, guaranteeing our hours from the start of September, because that would be what everybody else got. We're not asking for that much. We're asking for $1,500 per person. Please do the right thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Powell, who do we have next?
The next speaker is Veronica Duchek.
Welcome.
Hi, my name is Veronica Duchek, and it's D-U-C-Z-E-K, and my pronouns are she and her. So good evening, Superintendent Guerrero and members of the board. Like Barbara, an employee in the Nutrition Services Department at PPS. I am proud to say that I'm a lunch lady currently serving the students at Creative Science School. And like Barbara, I am also a member of my union's bargaining team. PPS custodians and nutrition services employees began impact bargaining with PPS on January 26th, and we are still bargaining with a deadline of April 26th coming up in less than 2 weeks. Everyone can agree that it is not just one person that helps a student learn. They need teachers, counselors, nurses, para-educators, bus drivers, and the list goes on. They need custodians to ensure they have a safe and clean building to learn in, a building that is not too hot and not too cold, a building where the garbage is emptied and the soap and toilet paper are kept stocked, a building under the care of a custodian who makes sure everything works. They need nutrition services employees to feed them nutritious food. Their brains cannot learn if their body is hungry. The lunch lady is someone they see every day who is as happy to see them as they are to see us. And yet we are being treated without the respect that employees who are essential to the education of Portland's children deserve. For nearly 3 months, we have asked for PPE required to do our job safely, regular communication from our directors, heat and shelter at our outdoor grab and go sites, the choice to work at a location without student contact. PAT and SFSP were given this choice, not us. Instead of looking out for nutrition services employees and reinstating them into work share once the top up began Again, on January 1st of this year, the union had to ask that these employees be reinstated. These employees who had had their hours cut, who are the lowest paid workers at PPS, these workers who are mostly women. And PPS said, no, it would be too hard. But once they looked into it, they discovered it wasn't hard at all. In the meantime, these women lost out on 5 weeks of payments for a total of $1,500. This is why our hazard pay request is for $1,500. Every step of the way, PPS has said no to our proposals and had us come back to the table again and again. Yes, they have given us masks. Yes, they have agreed to regular communication. Yes, they are reaching out to the grab and go sites. But it was only after weeks and weeks of bargaining. And still they have refused our hazard pay proposal. So I have a request. Our next bargaining session is Thursday, April 15th. I'm requesting that someone who can talk to us seriously about hazard pay for nutrition services employees attend that meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Veronica. Ms. Powell, is there further public comment?
Yes, we have Chris Reiser.
Welcome, Chris.
Thank you. My name is Chris Reiser. I'm at Ockley Green Middle School in North Portland. And I am, first of all, I just want to give a big shout out to SEIU Local 503 and everything that they have been going through. I wish you guys would listen and respect them and settle. They're our lowest paid workers, and they've been on the front lines this whole time. It's unbelievable just sitting here and listening to what these folks are coming and asking for, and they're being so respectful. I don't know how. I've seen the pure politics of this whole situation, from the President of the United States pushing to return all the way down to the governor's order announced from Sitten with Guadalupe Guerrero standing right there in tow. I saw the chiefs of this adversarial team sit back and negotiate without care for what educators were actually going to be facing in our classrooms in this situation. And we know who this is for. Right? It was really interesting how the chief of systems performance, right before he trots out this survey that shows our inability to reach historically marginalized groups, our inability to actually center those who are marginalized, and shows that the vast majority of students that are going to be returning are students of European descent. Who is this for? And yet, right before he said that, he said, we center everything we do in equity. Empty words. It's politics. And we can see it so clearly. I was there at Sitten for the rally when all of a sudden the site for announcing the first day of return on April 1st, it magically changed after SEIU 503 said they were going to have a rally there. And suddenly Mr. Guerrero and the governor, they popped up to get their PR, not at Sitten, because they didn't want that negative attention of our lowest paid workers being disrespected. So they bounced over to Scott real quick on the low, right? So that they could get those pictures of students loving their learning in the classroom. And I see on the slides, you put Black and brown folks on your slides while perpetuating white supremacy. We can see it all happening, and it's gross. I want to give a shout out to Nathan Shue for actually calling this board into what real leadership means, which is following by example. You guys got to lead from the front, and listening to the way that you guys talked about returning to in-person. That was unbelievable. What a slap in the face. Things like, well, I believe it was Director Bailey who said, if we're wearing a mask, there's actually a subtraction from communication. The face part is part of communication as well, that we absorb unconsciously. Okay, so, but it's okay for kids, right? And when Mr. Shue calls this out, Director Lowry says, I think that we can say students going back in the classroom gain that social connection and ability to engage with their teacher what do we gain other than the leadership by example question? What else do we gain by returning to in-person meetings? That was so disrespectful to the thousands of educators who are being forced back into these conditions and under terms where we have been negotiating under duress because of the governor's false urgency that was created by a piece of paper. And then you guys have just railroaded us and SEIU and all of the folks who actually carry this out. And you're forgetting who it is that has the agency. Nothing happens without educators.
Thank you for your testimony tonight. We appreciate you.
I hope you guys do better by SEIU 503.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reiser.
Our last person tonight is Aaron Brown.
Welcome, Aaron.
Good evening. Can folks hear me? Awesome.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Aaron Brown. I'm with an organization called No More Freeways. I first just wanted to express my appreciation for PPS as an institution. I spoke to many of you last week, but the folks that weren't there, thank you to the board members, PPS staff, and PPS educators who have navigated truly tremendous and unfathomable challenges over the last couple months. I'm deeply grateful for your public service. I spoke to many of you last week at the PPS Intergovernmental Committee. I saw Director Scott Bailey at our rally on Friday. Thank you to PPS for hosting us at Tubman. Thank you to your Civic Use of Building team, who was excellent to work with. I will also say that I personally missed being at Tubman. I was visiting teachers there frequently before the pandemic, and the history and importance of that building as a site of Black activism for education justice. It's hard to ignore. And also I missed being in a crowd with distance and masks, but being in a crowd on a sunny day felt like a moment of healing and recovery and resilience. And it was great to hear from former Tubman students and teachers whose moral clarity continues to inspire me. We'll be happy to pass around a link if you want to listen to some of their speeches at our rally. The news came out today in Oregon Public Broadcasting about what Oregon Department of Transportation wants to do in the backyard of Harriet Tubman Middle School with this expansion. ODOT has been hiding that document from you and from the public, the plans of this expansion and the amount of land they want to take in Tubman's backyard. That document we found through a public records request was dated in 2018. So they've had the document, they just haven't shared it with you. This is the latest in a long list of ODOT shenanigans where they have hidden from the public numerous key crucial details. They hid from us the cost of the project, which continues to escalate. They hid from us the number of lanes wide this project would be. It took numerous asks and months of public records requests for ODOT to give a simple basic detail. How many lanes wide is this freeway? And the reason it was difficult was that they were proposing a freeway wide enough for 10 lanes and did not want you to know this. When called upon this at a meeting, ODOT blamed TriMet, saying TriMet had asked for a bus rapid transit lane, and then TriMet was like, no, we didn't do that. ODOT manipulated the traffic data and brought on a flashy new peer review panel that was not empowered to actually review the accuracy of that traffic projection data. Our lawsuit that we filed, and I'll talk more about that in a second, includes dozens of pages of technical analysis demonstrating without a margin of doubt the way that ODOT put their fingers on the scale to come up with the data that said that somehow this would be the unicorn of a freeway expansion, the first in North American history that would somehow lower air pollution or carbon emissions. But I want to spend my time talking about the hearing on Thursday. Many of you spoke about how concerned you were about the air pollution and your desire to see ODOT potentially buy out the building if the project made the school unsalvageable. I respect that, and obviously if ODOT's playing hardball, that their freeway expansion is so important that it's worth displaying the historic fought over civic treasure of a building, well, you got to do what you got to do. But Director Comstam spoke about wanting to put together a letter stating where PPS stands on all of this. And I want to encourage you, in addition to naming the price, to look at other tactics to fight this project that recognize the history and importance of this school, and that ODOT shouldn't be able to bully the district into selling this property to you for fossil fuel infrastructure. I don't think fossil fuel infrastructure should take the right of way from a historic Black civic institution. In 2019, the PPS resolution that you signed implied you'd oppose the project without a full environmental impact statement. We still don't have a full environmental impact statement. ODOT passed an environmental assessment on the condition that they can engage with community partners, and many of those community partners, the mayor, Commissioner Udaley, Albina Vision Trust, and Multnomah County, all left in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. I hear my timer going off. I'll finish real quick. You as PPS have what Director Scott called enormous soft power to encourage other similarly skeptical local elected officials to band together and tell ODOT it's obscene to propose this massive $800 million freeway expansion in the backyard of Tubman Middle School. That's what an EIS would provide. An EIS would give you that mechanism to study congestion pricing before expansion, which would improve the air pollution at the building as it currently is without having to move the building and this cherished institution. I have more. I would just want to say I'm eager to work with you, both PPS board members and staff into the future, and info@nomorefreewayspdx.com. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you, Aaron.
That's it.
Okay, thank you so much to all of those who spoke and gave public testimony. Know that our board manager, Roseanne Powell, will follow up with you as needed. And if you have anything else you'd like to share, remember that email address, publiccomment@pps.net. We move now to our reports from Student Representative Hsu.
Thank you. So as everyone watching tonight is doubtless aware, hybrid instruction is upon us. For most of our students, this marks the first opportunity to take part in in-person education in over a year. For high schoolers such as myself, this week is our last one in CDL. I want to thank all of our teachers, administrators, BESC staff, and other employees for making this happen. I know it has been and will likely continue to be an enormous lift, and I am grateful for your sacrifices to improve the lives and educations of our students. As we embark on this new chapter, I would also like to reiterate that student safety must be paramount. As we know from the survey the DSC and I administered, health and safety concerns are widespread among students, ranging from worries about adherence to guidelines, to social distancing, to masks, to vaccines. It is crucial that we do everything in our power to ensure that we address these fears and to ensure that all of the plans developed for hybrid learning are adequately implemented in practice. If there's anything the DSC and I can do to be of help to these ends, please don't hesitate to let us know. And to the students of PPS, it is critical that we must do our part in protecting each other's health. We must comply with all social distancing guidelines, wear our masks consistently and correctly, and be sure to follow all other public health guidelines to the greatest degree possible. I truly hope that all of us, particularly our older students, rise to the occasion. In other news, I'm pleased to announce that Jackson Weinberg, the current Deputy Student Representative and the District Student Council member from Cleveland, will be the student representative to the PPS Board of Education for the 2021-2022 school year, beginning this July, immediately after my term expires. Many of you already know Jackson. For those of you who do not, he will be joining a board meeting closer to the beginning of his term to introduce himself. Additionally, the DSC has elected Grant Representative Samantha DePinto as its secretary for the remainder of the 2020-2021 school year, a new role that was created by one of the bylaws amendments that I spoke of in a previous report. She will be responsible for taking notes at DSC meetings, as well as setting agendas for meetings along with myself and the deputy student rep. Thank you, and that concludes my report.
Thank you so much, Nathaniel, for all the work you've done and for this call to sort of action and responsibility of students. Superintendent Guerrero, do you have a report to share with us tonight?
I do have a report to share, Chair. Thank you. Good evening, directors, and buenas tardes to those watching the meeting live stream from home. When I shared my last report with you, I'm not making you nervous, am I, Roseanne? When I shared my last report with you, we were on the verge of opening our classrooms to elementary age students all across the city for the first time in over a year. And after almost 30 years as an educator, I know first days of school are never perfect, but we've done a pretty good job these last several years. Our goal this time with an unusual springtime opening was to positively and safely welcome students and staff back to classrooms to begin in-person learning. I mentioned previously that with everyone pitching in and doing their part, that we would be ready to open schools again, and we were prepared, and it was time. So I'm happy to report that elementary school reopenings have gone smoothly. Our thanks and appreciation go out to all the educators, our administrators, families, our students, and all those who support them. They were ready. It took a lot of thoughtful planning, hard work, preparation, flexibility, and creativity. And the result has been so far a remarkably positive school reopening. We took the opportunity to host open house school tours to stakeholders in advance, as well as featured schools like Sitten to demonstrate the health and safety precautions being instituted. We safely welcomed back pre-K through 5th grade, and now we're less than a week away from safely welcoming back middle and high school students and staff. We were delighted that our directors joined us at a number of schools the first few days of reopening, as evidenced by the snapshots here. I think it's fair to say that our directors were as excited as our students to be back. I know our school leaders and families appreciated having you visible and present. I know many of our students were eager to share with you their excitement, or in the case of Chair Lowry, their math worksheets. I understand that there was some serious hopscotching by at least 2 of our directors. And many of your takeaways were probably similar to my own. It was a beautiful sight to see everyone on the playgrounds. It was great to see all of our central office educators and administrators present on campuses to support our school communities, ready to pitch in and welcome students whose families have chosen to return to in-person instruction. So from an early first morning at Scott Elementary, where we were joined by Governor Brown and media outlets covered the day from so many of our schools across the city, my own school visits to Sacagawea and Clarendon Head Starts, as well as Sabin and Sunnyside Elementary schools these first few days, they've all illustrated that how the careful preparation, how the campus-specific safety plans, it's paid off. The joy of being back on campus is clearly evident by our students, educators, and families. So the sight of our youngest scholars returning back to schools, especially after such a long absence, has reminded us to appreciate the privilege it is to be together, engaged in teaching and learning, in friendship and in play. And of course, there's more work to do. There will be additional new challenges to confront, but just as before, we'll remain focused on being prepared and being ready for whatever comes our way. That's the core of our mission, to serve and support our students. So we look forward to seeing our directors and our fellow colleagues out and about again as we open our middle and high schools next week. Yet another significant milestone on our way to eventually reopening our schools more fully this coming fall. Yes, let me say it clearly. It's our expectation that we will fully reopen for 5 days a week of in-person instruction this coming fall. In fact, you'll see on the board agenda later this evening our proposed 2021-22 school calendar. Now, we've been living in a fluid and dynamic reality for the last year. But unless health conditions and guidance from public health and Department of Education officials do not yet permit it, we expect and intend to welcome all students back to school this coming September. And because there's no substitute for the actual sights and sounds of our schools, and after more than a year of schools being closed, I want to share with you a short video of that first morning last Thursday at Scott Elementary so that we can all celebrate this milestone and you can all feel a bit of the joy of that day.
We started welcoming students at 7:45. That moment was a frenzy of a lot of emotions. We had a lot of parents drop off their students. We had some students ride the bus.
Arrival, I think, went really well today. It was exciting as families and students arrived to see them, to talk to them. Families would walk their students to the line, and then students would take their place on the dots, and families were then able to wait up above the lines and watch their students as they were greeted by their teacher, and then wave to their students as their line went into the
We had quite a few visitors in the building, including our Superintendent Guadalupe Guerrero, as well as Governor Kate Brown. It was great to have community leaders in our building. Families can see that our leaders are listening. Kids learn best when they're here in the school, in the classroom.
I'm so excited to see the kids back. Everybody's happy. Teacher, the principal, vice principal, and me too.
Students seemed very happy in class, so we were singing, dancing. Everybody had masks on. Everyone was following the safety protocols. We definitely had some fun on recess. Might have included some very bad hula hoop competitions.
It was nice to see just their smile.
Virtually all students were extremely excited. You could tell they were nervous, but they finally got to see their teacher in person. They finally got to see other students from their class working on a coloring sheet, working on solving math equations. One classroom had students make crowns that they would put on their head. And it was just a great way to see kids in action. Having kids in the building, you have to show students how to walk in the hallway to get to recess or come back from recess. And we're realizing that some of those transitions are taking a little bit longer than expected.
Well, these are unprecedented times, so I think it's hard to say if it went exactly as expected, because in the pandemic, I feel like it's hard to ever know what to expect. But I do think things went really well, and overall, it was a really great day, and kids seemed really excited to be here and excited to come back again tomorrow.
All in all, a great moment, a great way to see everybody in one place. And I think people were longing for that feeling of connection that school provides.
This is the opportunity to be something that can meet the needs of every single student and ensure that all of our students have all the opportunities that they deserve and really prepare them for the jobs of the future.
I think directors got to see the superintendent's classroom shuffle there. Proud moments. I just sincerely want to appreciate everyone for bringing joy to as we welcome back our students to school. We are PPS. New topic, leadership announcements. From the first days of school to our path forward as an organization, I'm very pleased to share with you in the community 2 new leadership promotions. Both of these individuals have outstanding track records at PPS, and I'm eager to have them tackle in earnest new challenges in their new roles. First of all, Dana Nuremberg, who will serve as the district's first Director of Learning Acceleration, working in the Office of Teaching and Learning. Dana will play a key leadership role in our transition back to in-person learning after more than a year of distance learning during the COVID pandemic. Dana moves to the central office from Sitten Elementary, where she has been principal since 2014. In her new role, and this is a new and we feel now necessary role at PPS. Dana will collaborate and work closely with multiple departments and community-based partners as PPS begins to reimagine summer programming, enrichment, and extended learning as we move forward. During her time as principal, Sitten established a dual language immersion program and expanded the school's inclusion model for students receiving special education services. Dana's tenure at Sitten was marked by high student and family engagement, lower discipline rates, and robust partnerships with community organizations. She's a strong leader and advocate for students and families. As she has shown throughout her career, since starting as a 2nd grade teacher, she is student-centered and results-oriented, and her new role will be central to our developing plans for this summer and beyond. So as is tradition, I'd like to invite Dana to say a few words here.
I do not see her on here, Superintendent Guerrero. Oh, here she is.
She's going to share how ecstatic she is to be in this new role.
Good
Ms.
evening,
Nerber.
everyone. I was like, I'm here, but you couldn't see me. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Superintendent. I'm just really excited, humbled, honored, and at this exact moment, a little overwhelmed. I just started the role yesterday, and already there's just so much opportunity to learn and build on successful programming. There's an extraordinary team that is already ramping up to develop amazing summer opportunities for our students around academics, around play, around cultural partners, and opportunities for our kids to really engage socially and leverage their strengths and interests. I'm also really excited to build on the many skills our kids have gained in the past year. I was really apprehensive. How are we going to do Spanish immersion kindergarten on a screen? And with thanks to amazing teachers, brilliant students, and thoughtful parents, our kids have learned a lot of new skills. And so I'm eager to think about how we can leverage all of those new skills our students have gained to really create amazing opportunities for them in this new role.
Thank you, Dana, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Next leadership announcement, directors, a very familiar face. Jonathan Garcia will assume the role of Chief of Staff in this new leadership role. Jonathan's work will be focused on supporting our collective efforts at realizing our vision for Portland Public Schools. As Chief of Staff, Jonathan will be a member of the executive leadership team and serve as an extension and proxy of the superintendent to advance the successful implementation of key district priorities. Jonathan will manage the operations of the Office of the Superintendent, including serving as the liaison to the Board of Education, in addition to overseeing our communications, government affairs, strategic partnerships, and community engagement teams. He will be responsible for collaboration and accountability among top leadership at PPS and will play a central role in ensuring our efforts meet our high standards and central obligation to serve students. Hopefully you've observed in his 3.5 years at PPS, Jonathan has made important contributions in a number of areas, including and especially in how we engage and support our students and families. He spearheaded the broad community effort and organizational initiative that resulted in our PPS vision, now the district's North Star. He launched the fund for PPS, which has already raised and distributed significant resources that have been a lifeline for many PPS families during the pandemic. Jonathan's ability to creatively build, cultivate, and leverage partnerships has resulted in a number of direct benefits for our schools and students. He is unapologetically student-centered. I will count on Jonathan's collaborative work ethic to advance our priorities and elevate student outcomes. He has demonstrated during his successful tenure as Chief Engagement Officer that he is up for the myriad of challenges and complexities that come with leadership in a larger urban school district. I have full confidence in his ability to support our collective journey and transformation as a school system. I want to welcome new Chief of Staff, Jonathan Garcia, to share a few words.
Thank you, Superintendent. Good evening, Chair Lowry, Vice Chair Bailey, directors, and student representative. Just want to start off by thanking Superintendent Guerrero for entrusting me in this new role. More than 3.5 years ago, I came to Portland Public Schools really excited for our refreshed sense of direction. And today I'm really humbled and honored to begin this new endeavor, really continuing to steward the collective imagination of our community towards a reimagined public school system. Prior to coming to Portland, I built my career in the social and public sector, working at the intersection of strategy, innovation, and strategic partnerships, all aimed at building systems that empower people, that contribute towards racial equity and social justice, and build thriving and self-sufficient communities. As PPS's next Chief of Staff, not only will I bring the successes and the learnings of my professional experiences, I will bring a rich personal story to the work. As the son of undocumented immigrants, my story is filled with seasons of joy, celebration, and rich history, and at the same time, filled with moments of despair and sadness. I believe that these experiences, achievements, and learnings of my life and career braid together in a way that prepares me to serve as an extension of Superintendent Guerrero's leadership, and in executing on the district's strategic plan, really inching us closer to reimagining PPS. In this new role, I look forward to working with all of you as elected officials, my colleagues at central office and at school sites, and our parent and student community to continue pushing the envelope, encouraging boldness and inspiring innovation, all which I know will result in better systems, processes, and experiences, especially for our students and families of color. I want to thank this wonderful and dynamic Portland community. Thank you for welcoming me in, inviting me to sit at the table and listen, and including me as part of our collective effort to do right by every kid. Trust and credibility is earned, and I look forward to building on the trust that I've garnered over the years to continue making our public school system the best it can be for our students. Lastly, I want to acknowledge all of my colleagues. I have the utmost of privileges to work alongside and with. Thank you for being there for students. And thank you for being about our students. Thank you for all you have particularly done in support of our students, their families, and each other this year. Many of you have been there for me as well. You've given me that nod that says, we're in this together. And you've challenged me to be a better leader, a better human, and thank you. While my colleagues and I all have different reasons for being in this work and investing our energy to better our public schools, the truth of the matter is that we come at this work with a true spirit of servant leadership. I look forward to channeling that energy and continuing to ground ourselves to our core values and to build a together we will organizational culture where we can all thrive. Thank you for having me tonight and allowing me to share a few remarks. We'll see you all tomorrow for another day in service of our students and our public schools. Thanks.
Bright and early at agenda setting. Thank you, Jonathan, and congratulations.
Congratulations.
Together we will.
Together we will. Directors, that concludes my report for tonight.
Thank you, Superintendent, and looking forward to continuing to work with Jonathan. We turn now to our committee and conference reports. We do them in alphabetical order because that's as good as any other arbitrary order we could do them in. So turn now to the Audit Committee. Director Brim-Edwards, do you have anything to share about your work on the Audit Committee?
No, we made the decision to skip our April meeting in the spirit of staying focused and allowing staff to stay focused on reopening of the schools. So we will restart the work or restart our committee work in May.
Great, thank you. Director DePass, anything from the School Improvement Bond Committee?
We have a meeting coming up on Thursday at 4:30. It's open to the public. Come if you want to get updates on what's happening on that committee.
Thank you. Director Moore, CBRC?
CBRC has a meeting this Thursday, including a preview of some budget, the way the budget is being built for next year.
Director Constam, anything from Charter and Alternative Programs?
We are meeting next Wednesday.
And I know that we got some follow-up from Mr. McFerrin, who gave public testimony at the last board meeting. And I know that your committee will probably be raising that as well on that meeting on Wednesday, correct?
We will be, indeed.
Great. Just wanted to close that loop for those of us who remembered his comments last week or 2 weeks ago. Director Scott, anything from the Intergovernmental Committee?
Yes, thank you. We met on April 8th for an intergovernmental committee meeting. We got a legislative update, and then we had a discussion and update on the I-5 project, which of course we heard someone testify earlier tonight on. There was a good slide deck that some folks testified on from No More Freeways that I think is available in the materials that I would encourage board members, if you haven't looked at, to look through, but walk through some of the key issues there, and really sort of a sense of what our next steps are. And then we also had at the very end a quick discussion of the federal infrastructure package and what might be in that for schools. And I'm sorry, I just, as a follow-up on the I-5 project, I was going back through my notes really quickly here. I think we are looking to get a full board briefing in terms of from the state in terms of what that project looks like. And then another issue that Director Brim-Edwards brought up was the need to also come up with a community engagement plan, around that, so that the community's not hearing things from the district that we haven't talked to them about. So I think both those things are are going to be underway.
Director Moore, anything from the policy committee?
The policy committee has been on hiatus for a few weeks. We were originally scheduled to meet next Monday on the 19th, but in light of the fact that that's the first day back for middle school and high school, we were asked to postpone in order to free up staff time. So we're now scheduled to meet on Monday, the 26th for a policy committee meeting.
Great. And that meeting will be at noon, correct? So the time, not only has the date changed, but the time has also changed. So those of you who are policy committee attenders and watchers, just make a note of that change.
What time is it?
That meeting, isn't that meeting at noon? There's a possibility, I could be wrong, but I have the policy committee is at noon on Monday, the 24th.
That's correct. Noon to 3.
All right. Looks like we have maybe some scheduled things to work out as a board, but that is when the meeting has been posted for. Director,
Can I make just a quick correction that it's Monday the 26th.
26th.
I was going to say, now you've got me totally confused.
Monday the 26th.
I'm obviously having a very hard time with numbers tonight. And so as Superintendent Guerrero shared with you, I had a student show me their math homework at Scott. And I asked them some questions about their homework to try to help them. And maybe I was not the best person to do that, given my lack of ability to deal with numbers this evening. All right.
That sounds like a Dan Quayle moment. I feel like did we get that on video?
Probably, yes. It will live forever on the internets now. All right, Director Bailey and Director Brim Edwards, do we have any further updates to the Rose Quarter piece? The stunning news about, I saw the article that said 25 feet of land, perhaps, from Tubman. Any further updates on those conversations? No, nothing at this time. And I know we'll continue to speak about that with our intergovernmental committee. Any other things we need to share from committee or conference reports? Anything from Amy?
Yeah, Chair Lowry, I just wanted to share that I am serving on a small task force of board members from around the country, working to put together guidelines for districts on this latest round of ESSER funds that are coming through from the federal government. And the Council of Great City Schools is going to be putting together some guidance by the end of April, so that comes through in time for boards to use it in their own budget processes. And so they have a series of small working groups of superintendents, board members, which I'm participating in, budget directors or CFOs that will be feeding into that document to just provide what districts should do, what districts should not do, real focus on sustainability, since these are one-time funds. And a real theme that's emerging from the guidance from our board leaders is how to structure transparency and accountability for our communities so that they can see what we're prioritizing for this infusion of resources in response to the pandemic. So stay tuned, but hopefully this will be helpful to all our member districts around the country.
Great, thank you for your work with the Council of Great City Schools. Director Bailey?
Yeah, just real briefly, I was able to sit in on, I couldn't make the whole meeting, but part of the meeting, staff meeting, providing updates on the multiple pathways to graduation building, which is continuing on in the design process. And it was a really great presentation where the designers have been able to add some programmatic space through more efficient design. So to add some features for students that weren't in the original plan without adding to the cost of the building. So just great work by that team.
Excellent. We as a board are meeting in retreat on the 24th, which is a Saturday, not a Monday. And we are going to be continuing our work that came out of our board self-evaluation last summer. And so just a reminder that those of you who are tasked with certain work areas, those materials are due to Roseanne on the 17th. So that gives us and the public a full week to review those items ahead of our retreat on the 24th. And we'll be looking at things like our guardrails, ethics statement for the board, our communications protocols, a new mechanism for electing board leadership, and some revisions to public comment. So, all right, I think that's everything for our board and conference reports. Before we move on to the Mascot Resolution 6286 for Leotis McDaniel High School, let us take a 5-minute break. And I hear we've got maybe some smooth jazz stylings from the Roosevelt community. Roseanne, Ms. Powell did some work today to find us some amazing student music to share during our break time. So let's take 5 minutes and be back here at 7:18. Thanks, everyone. our meeting, and I am so excited for our next agenda item, where we are going to hear about identifying a new mascot for Leotis v. McDaniel High School. Superintendent Guerrero, would you please introduce this item?
Would love to. On February 23rd, directors, if you recall, unanimously approved resolution number 6251 to change the name of Madison High School to Leotis v. McDaniel High School. Similar to the process for the naming of McDaniel High School, a committee was formed to identify a new mascot, and the engagement process led by students with support from our Office of Community Engagement has concluded its process and arrived at a recommendation, which I'm pleased to share tonight in recommending to directors consider and approve the school community's choice of Mountain Lions as the new mascot for Leotis v. McDaniel High School. I'd like to introduce and have Camille Edidebo, our Corporate and Foundation Relations Officer, along with Principal Adam Skiles and members of the school team to share more on how this recommendation came together.
Thank you, Superintendent Guerrero, and good evening, Board of Education. I'm here in support of the school community's recommendation, and I will defer to Principal Skiles to speak to the incredible community work that has been done to date, and our students who've really spearheaded this process.
I have a question, Ms. Dedeva. Are you ready for this PowerPoint to begin now? Or do you want to just let me know?
Yes, please. Principal Skiles.
Thank you. Good evening, Superintendent Guerrero and board members. My name is Adam Skiles, proud principal of Leotis v. McDaniel High School. I'm here tonight. I apologize. Hold on one second. I'm here tonight to present to you the McDaniel Renaming Committee mascot change proposal. For the past month and a half, our renaming committee has continued the process voted on back in July regarding the renaming and branding of our school. Our mascot decision has serious considerations for our community. It has been considered by the committee, community, and broader public. It is a decision not made lightly. Our request for a mascot change tonight follows our administrative directive and the initial process undertaken back in July. We have worked diligently to ensure we have a mascot that is representative of our school and community. The process provided our community with 6 finalists that all received a level of community support, and the final vote was close. Regarding all of the community feedback through this process, reading all of the community feedback through this process has been a reminder of how fortunate I am to be a member of this amazing community. Next slide, please. It is with great honor that I introduce some of our incredible committee members. Their support and commitment to this process has been instrumental to the success of where we are today. Zane, Cindy, and Leslie will be leading our presentation tonight. I cannot let this opportunity pass to say how impressed I am with all of our committee members, but especially the student leaders. They have shown compassion, maturity, and resilience through this process. At times, placing the community voice above their own personal preference. Watching them through this process has been inspiring, and I want to thank them and all the committee members for their effort through this process. Now I would like to pass it over to Leslie to start the presentation.
All right, thank you, Principal Skiles. Next slide, please. All right, hello again, board members. It's great to be here to talk to you all about our mascot proposal and our overall process. You'll recall from our renaming process that as a committee, we were intentional in grounding ourselves in racial justice values, but also our own school values of community, respect, education, equity, and diversity. All throughout our process, we have come back to selecting a name and mascot that not only represents these values, but that also dedicates work to a process that is transparent and has community input.
Next slide, please. From the beginning of the renaming process in finding a new name for our school, our committee was aware that we too were going to support finding our new mascot. Our committee met early March after the board approval of the Leotis v. McDaniel name. We came together to plan our key steps to make sure our community had as much time as possible to be engaged in this process. In our first survey to our community, we wanted to hear from our community members about their suggestions. Once they got back to us, we worked together to make sure that the suggestions put back to the community as 12 finalists were unique, representing our community voices. Ultimately, was their vote that decided on the new mascot. In April, we held a couple of meetings to make sure our ranking process for a final vote was a good one. We sent out a third survey with 6 semi-finalist options where the community had the opportunity to rank their top 3 choices. We then worked with research and analysis department to make sure our data collection and analysis was cross-referenced and transparent.
Next slide, please. Thank you. In our outreach through surveying and phone banking to Spanish-speaking families and others, we were able to receive about 518 initial nominations for a mascot. For our second survey, where the community was able to vote on the 12 finalists, we received 1,232 responses, and in our last survey to the community, we received 1,512.
Next slide, please. All right, as previously stated, our mascot finalist is the Mountain Lions. The Mountain Lions emphasize leadership, strength, courage, integrity, and power. Mountain lions are known not to lead through force, but rather through graceful strength of example. The symbolism of the mountain lion, as previously stated, is leadership. Not only are mountain lions indigenous to the Pacific Northwest, but our school would be the first high school in the entire state of Oregon to have mountain lions as a mascot. In our vetting process and research, we are confident that our selection represents our creed values.
Next slide, please. Our community input was critical to this process, and briefly I will highlight some of their input. This one quote says, "The goal would be to learn to lead without insisting that others follow your lead. Observe the graceful pounce of a mountain lion, and you'll see the connection between the balance of power, intention, physical grace, strength, and grace. To convert it to human relevance, it would be a balance of body, mind, and spirit. You will never see this giant feline waste anything, not its energy or its food. It would only take what it needs for survival." From a PPS parent, mountain lions are known for their intelligence and skill as well as their power. They are supremely adapted and deeply connected to this area, unlike other big cats. They represent qualities that everyone can relate to. From a community member, the mountain lion also represents leadership and integrity, values that everyone in the MHS community strives for. Additionally, the mascot emblem will show strength and will invoke and exemplify the human balance of mind, body, spirit. And from a current student, my first choice is mountain lions because it is unique to McDaniel High School, honors our Pacific Northwest context, and is a powerful image. The alliteration is nice too.
Next slide, please. And that is all. Thank you so much for listening, and this time will be open for any comments or questions that you might have.
I think it's really great to hear from students, and I love the name personally of Mountain Lions. I love that they're indigenous to this area. I love the values they represent, and really commend you on a great process. Well done.
Yep, another a great choice. And I was happy to see Max Tuttle. I think he's a former student, a graduate. And while he was a student, I think I served with him on DBRAC. So it was great to see that he's still involved.
I just like to join in and first thank Camille for running the process. And I, like others, love hearing from the students and hearing about the attributes of the new mascot and how they're reflective of the school culture and the school community. So I'm going to be like an enthusiastic supporter of this mascot change.
All right.
Here, here, go Mountain Lions.
Yes, thank you all so much for your incredible hard work and for engaging your community. I love all the quotes you read. Do I have a motion and second to adopt Resolution 6286, resolution to change the mascot of Leotis v. McDaniel High School?
So moved.
Second.
So Director Brim-Edwards moves and Director DePass seconds the adoption of Resolution 6286. Is there any further board discussion?
Just a question, and this is the question I raised at the last meeting about the budget to transition from the current mascot to the new one. I know all over integrating it into a new school. I'm just I'm curious whether we have a budget for that and we're gonna be able to hit the ground running with the Mountain Lions in the fall.
I can speak to that. So yes, we do have a budget at a high level. The cost for Leotis v. McDaniel is around $350,000. A good amount of that money is integrated within the bond, so we were able to work it in. And PPS staff, we've met internally and have figured out a way to cover the costs. So we are moving forward, full speed ahead.
You are such a rock star. Thank you for your incredible hard work in this process. I know there were many people that were part of this process, but Camille, I want to specifically thank you for all of your incredible work and for spearheading that and getting that sorted with the money so that we can do the Mountain Lions justice.
It's a team effort. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's nothing worse than changing the name and not actually changing, making the change. So I'm glad to hear that we've got that in place.
Any other board discussion?
I just think the whole package is so exciting to see the building, to drive down and see the construction and how beautiful the building looks, and to get acquainted with the new name so it rolls off the tongue easily. And now we have a new mascot, and it's just inspiring and exciting to see Leotis McDaniel High School on the move.
Wait till you see the view from the gym.
I was going to say that sounds like a winning sports team.
Yeah, it does. So thank you all. And is there any public comment, Ms. Powell, on this matter?
There is not.
All right. Then I think we're ready to vote. The board will now vote on Resolution 6286, resolution to change the mascot of Leotis v. McDaniel High School. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? Resolution 6286 is approved by a vote of 7-0 with Student Representative Shu voting.
Yes.
All right, I think we all need to yell, "Go Mountain Lions" now. Are you ready? Go Mountain Lions!
Go Mountain Lions!
Congratulations and thank you all for your work on this matter. Superintendent Guerrero, we move on now to our update on COVID, hybrid, and LIPI. Would you like to introduce this agenda item?
Yes, thank you, Chair Lowry again. Tonight, staff will provide you and the community our regular update. And of course, now we've made our transition now to a hybrid model and the reopening of elementary schools to in-person learning. I know they'll also be sharing an update on survey outcomes from secondary school families as well. Tonight, we have many of the usual suspects: Dr. Russ Brown, Chief Assistant Performance, Dr. Sean Bird, Chief of Schools, Sharon Reese, Chief of Human Resources, and Danny Ledesma, and no shortage of other staff standing by to take your questions. Dr. Russ?
Good evening. Board Chair Lowry, Vice Chair Bailey, Superintendent Guerrero, members of the board and community. Please I'm
having a really hard time hearing you, Dr. Brown.
Can you hear me now?
It's still kind of echoey. Try again.
Hang on. Let's try again. Hear me now?
That's much better.
Great, but
good. Okay. Technical difficulties. So again, pleased to join you this evening. And pleased to be able to present an update to the board and community. Next slide, please. Yeah, today I'll give an update on the current COVID rates for the county, just our regular update. I'll also give our final update on our family preferences for hybrid, for middle school and for high school. And then we'll transition to Dr. Bird to talk about our phased opening status for middle and high school next week. Next slide, please. Again, as we've talked about throughout the year, our work really is centered in these values, and it shows up in a lot of different ways throughout the work that we're doing and throughout the data that we see for the system. We do center all our work from a racial equity and social justice point of view. It's why we spend so much time and energy trying to engage communities of color to make sure they have both voice and choice in process as we move towards reopening. Health and wellness of our staff and our students in our larger community is paramount. Again, you've heard and seen all the preparations that have been done. You've had the opportunity to visit buildings and see that work put into action. One of the things I've been most pleased about is, again, just seeing how our focus on relationship has shown up in our data and will continue to show up in our data as we move forward throughout this year. Our teachers really have leaned in and provided wonderful support to our students, as have our food service workers, et cetera. I visited and spent time helping provide food at different points during the year, and I was always impressed with work.
Dr. Brown?
Yes.
Sorry, maybe it's just me, but I can't hear very well. I don't know if it's just, is that just me?
I'm having a little bit, it feels like you're fading in and out. And I turned on the subtitles, which helped because subtitles are getting you loud and clear.
Okay, well, I will try to speak more clearly and loudly.
That helps.
Into the mic itself. I seem to be having a little bit of struggle with it today. And finally, we've had a lot of opportunity this year to strengthen and innovate the instruction that we provide. Next slide, please. So case rates are back on the rise. At this last 2-week window, we had 139.8 cases in Multnomah County. I think we're all aware that the case rates have been on the rise. I want you to, though, note that our current rate is still well below that green threshold. And under that green threshold, we're obligated to continue our opening process. And it's not until we move well above that red threshold that we would begin to consider options for not opening or scaling back. So at this point, we're well within the threshold in terms of the indicator for proceeding with opening school. Next slide, please. So again, I'm going to give an update on parent interest. We again reached out to our parents to gather their preferences for whether or not their students would continue in distance learning or in hybrid. Next slide, please. At this point, we, at the conclusion of the survey, which closed on April 2nd, we had an 86.1 percentage point participation rate. And of those folks who responded, about 7 out of 10 wanted their students to return to a hybrid. This was the highest preference for hybrid of any grade band. And you can see for our Black, Latino, and Native American respondents, those ranged in the mid-60s in terms of desire for hybrid. We heard from, we had at least a 50% response rate from 91% of our schools. And if we go to the next slide, we can see the breakdown in terms of response rates by race. Again, the first time we reported on this was March 30th. You can see by April 2nd, there were substantial improvements in participation rates across all racial groups. We had heard from 71.1% of our Black families, close to 83% of our Latino families. The Pacific Islanders were the group that we had heard the least from overall. But again, substantial improvement, and part of that, again, is by that concerted outreach effort through the phone banking, et cetera, to make sure that we reached everyone. Next slide, please.
Dr. Brown?
Yes, ma'am.
What happened between, on that last slide, what happened between March 30th and April 2nd? I mean, there's a pretty substantial change.
And that was my question as well.
So,
I was curious how the question was asked or what was the variable, what changed?
So what we're looking at here is participation rates. And so the participation rates increased, and that increased largely because we had such a concerted effort in terms of phone banking, both at the school and the central office level, to make sure that we captured as many voices as possible.
Yeah, I misread the title. I was thinking that was choosing hybrid versus participation.
Well, when we go to the next slide, you're going to see that the preference for hybrid actually decreased as the number of participants increased. And I think this sort of follows Director DePass's original sort of wondering. And that was, as we heard from more people, the folks that we were hearing from later on were not the folks who were sort of racing to let us know that they wanted hybrid. We were hearing from more and more folks who maybe were a little more reserved about that idea. And you see some declines in the interest for hybrid as we captured more voices. And you can see how that breaks out across different racial groups. White families did endorse hybrid at a higher rate than other groups. But roughly 6 out of 10 to 2 out of 3 folks said that they wanted hybrid between our Black, Latino, and Native American families. If we go on to the next slide, again, we're just going to transition and start talking about 9th grade, 9th through 12. One more slide, please. We heard from 89.4% of our high school students, which I think is a phenomenal response rate. And again, kudos to the teams that reached out. I know it took a concerted phone effort to be able to reach out. You'll notice that our high school families actually had the lowest interest in hybrid, with slightly under 60% wanting that. So elementary was in the mid 60s, middle school's around 70, we get to high school, it's around 60%. And you can see that the interest in hybrid instruction for our Black, Latino, and Native families is substantially lower than what we saw in middle school. Pleased to say that we heard we had a 75% response rate for every one of our comprehensive high schools. So again, very representative data. And if we go to the next slide, we can see, again, that breakdown on participation. Incredibly high participation rates, a significant increase from March 30th to April 6th. This survey closed on April 6th. And again, I think aligned to Director DePass's initial hypothesis, as we got to hear from more voices, we'll go to the next slide. We see a bit of a downward shift in interest, that as we heard from more people, the folks who were early adopters had a higher interest in hybrid than the folks that we heard from a little later on. And I think in the context of COVID and COVID risk, perhaps it's not surprising that our high school students might be the most reserved about this, because again, there's a differential risk factor by the time we get to adolescence. So I think the data, again, yes.
I was just going to ask, and I'd ask for this for the K-5s, but I'd be interested for the middle grades and the high schools for the disaggregated data on special ed students.
Yeah, in the final report, which I'm preparing for middle and high school, we'll have the disaggregation both for special ed, emergent bilinguals, and for students who are eligible for free and reduced price lunch.
Thank you.
Yep. So with that, I'm going to transition and hand things off to Dr. Bird, who hopefully will have a mic that's behaving better than mine.
Dr. Brown?
Yes.
Before you go, this is a little bit of a tangent, but what can you share with us anecdotally about our students that have shown up for hybrid in elementary? Do our numbers track with the survey results, or have we seen more families come back? And do we have many disparities between our schools in terms of the percentage of students remaining in CDL?
I have to be honest, Ms. Consom, I don't have that set of numbers in front of me right now. I do know, however, that Dr. Bird has been visiting schools, and he may be actually better prepared to speak to what he's seen anecdotally in buildings as he's gone about and visited.
I'd love to see that data at your convenience.
It's been on my mind as well to look at which students are participating in hybrid at this point in time, and how does that match up?
Yeah.
But I've got a couple of things that are in the works right now with the survey, and also trying to prep some information for the board regarding our math assessment as well.
Okay, good evening, board directors. As you heard earlier from the superintendent, our elementary students started back. It's been a very exciting couple of weeks in schools. And it's been fun to visit them. And I'm also happy to report that even the smallest of our students are following all the safety protocols. That I've seen everybody masked up and socially distanced, even when they're outside playing, they do that in bubbles. So it's been great to see, and just shout out to all of our teachers and principals for all the work that they've done. And now, if you go to the next slide, we're excited to be gearing up for our 6/12 opening. Actually, we started SAT administration will actually happen today on our high school campuses, and another date will be 4/27. We had to do it on 2 days this year because of the social distancing requirements. We have some HEPA filters that are still being delivered this week to the remaining classrooms in our high schools. So those are scheduled all to be delivered this week and in classrooms this week, so that the safety committees, as they do their walkthroughs, will see everything in place before we start on Monday. But there have been students in schools. I know at Lincoln, they've been doing freshman orientation all week in small groups. So it's been great to see school buses running through neighborhoods and to see students in buildings again. Again, student representatives have been invited to join the safety walkthroughs at the high school. So I know those invitations are going out from principals because those walkthroughs are happening later on this week. Just as a reminder, all high school and middle school staff members will have professional development April 14th to the 16th, so the end of this week. And while they're doing that, just like in elementary school, secondary students will be doing, have asynchronous assignments to complete. The district provides that curriculum to teachers that will be uploaded to the regular Canvas portal. And then the big day is Monday. So students will report back. Those who've elected to do so will report back either Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, Friday. And they'll be coming in the afternoons for school. Next slide, please. And just as a reminder, students will be participating in academic enrichment, extension, or intervention activities when they come to school. So they'll follow their schedule. They'll see their teachers as they normally do, and they'll have the opportunity to participate in face-to-face activities with their classmates as well as their teachers. And unlike elementary, secondary is a lot more straightforward in this way because of licensing issues. Kids will have the same teacher. They'll see the teacher online in the morning and then go see that very same person in the afternoon. So that's exciting. There, of course, are a couple of exceptions for teachers who have to take leave, but they'll have a different teacher both online and then in the afternoon. So the experience for secondary students in the morning will remain very much the same as it is right now, where they'll be with their entire class, and then those students that choose to come back in the afternoon will be working with their teacher, and the students who choose to stay home will be doing their applied learning just as they have done always. And on Wednesdays, there'll be opportunities for those students to meet with their teachers in office hours or small groups, just as they have been doing now. So I look forward to welcoming everyone back. We're excited to see them, and we'll take any questions you might have about 6 through 12 opening.
I have a question. There was earlier a couple middle schools that, because of space issues, I know at a minimum, I think Hosford and Selwood, but there may be others, we're not going to have every week in person, and I want to know if those issues have been addressed. I know it was a space constraint. If those issues have been addressed, and are there other schools besides those two where that was a concern that you had to make adjustments?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We did resolve the issues at Hosford and Selwood, so they are down to 2 cohorts. We have one school that's at 3 cohorts right now. That's Da Vinci. I think we're still working on a couple of things, but the demand was very high at that school. And of course, that has to do with space constraints. But we were able to resolve those issues at the other schools, which, as you saw in the earlier, the results that Dr. Brown presented, middle school had the highest demand. So we're very happy that we're able to get those kids into 2 cohorts. We'll still take another look at Da Vinci as well.
I'm going to ask the question that we keep getting mail about, which is that the experience is going to just be a glorified study hall. So can you speak to,
sure.
We're getting a lot of mail about that, and that's an oft repeated talking point. So I think it's good to be clear what students are going to be experiencing when they're there.
Sure, and I think we got some of that discussion about elementary. It was only going to be 2 hours and 15 minutes. What are kids going to be able to do? What we're actually seeing is, and I expect we'll see the same thing in high school, is that kids will come to school. The children who choose to come back into the school in person, and they will be able to do a variety of activities. In some cases, they'll work in groups with each other, socially distanced. In some instances, teachers will pull kids up who need individual help. And in some instances, they'll be doing, kind of extension or enrichment activities, just like you would do in a regular class. When I was a teacher, I would do some whole group teaching for 10 or 15 minutes, and then kids would go off and do things on their, either on their own or in small groups or with me as the teacher. So it will look very much the same as it would in a classroom, and it's opportunities for students who need additional help to get that, but also for extensions of what they're learning. Well, they're just like students at home will be doing some activities, some applied learning activities. Those kids will be doing. It will look different because there's independent work and then there's work that is guided by a teacher, but it will be on the same topics that they learned in class. So if I were a teacher, if I were teaching, introducing a new concept in the morning with everybody online, the kids that came in the afternoon, I would be reinforcing those concepts in class. Just as the kids at home that are not coming in are working on something, these kids will be doing activities will be a little different because they're together and they're in the room with me. So I have the opportunity to interact with them in different ways. But and then on Wednesdays, the students who are not coming in for whatever reason, they'll have an opportunity to interact with me in office hours or small groups, just like they do now. So it's not intended to be study hall or less than academic at all.
So is this one of the standards? I mean, there will be whole group teaching?
Instruction. So in the morning when everybody's online, that's whole group instruction, but sometimes teachers break kids up into small groups, into breakout rooms or whatever. But when they come back in the afternoon, there'll be further development of those concepts that they learned in class. It won't be new material because then the kids that are not coming in will not have the advantage of having that instruction. So we don't expect teachers to be teaching new material, but it's extension activities of what they did in the morning.
Dr. Berg, can I just jump in to say thank you for that explanation? And I think we need to amplify that a little bit more. I'll just be really blunt. I actually find the characterization of study hall to be pretty offensive towards our teachers, and also showing a real lack of understanding of what happens during the school day in a normal year, right? Without a pandemic. I mean, the idea that our children are learning something new from their teacher every minute of the day is obviously not true. And teaching is about, introducing new concepts and reinforcing them. And I am actually very excited to have that opportunity for kids in person, to get that reinforcement in person from their teachers. And I'm confident that's what's going to be happening. So I think it's an unfortunate narrative, and I think we should continue to repeat that, that it is both going to be beneficial and an academic experience, and it is also to keep the 20-30% of our students who are not comfortable coming back from falling behind, which is also a responsibility of this district. So I just appreciate that explanation.
I want to echo what you said, Director Scott, there, that as the parent of a high schooler, as you are as well, when before the pandemic, when she was in class for 90 minutes, that wasn't all lecture time. That wasn't all 90 minutes of the teacher giving direct instruction. There were those, like you said, Chief Bird, those moments where people were engaged in small groups or doing activities to sort of reinforce and internalize that learning. And that's what will be happening in the afternoons, either asynchronously for those students who do not return, and with small groups or other activities in the classroom. So again, I also echo that study hall notion is completely off base for what the experiences will be for our students in the classroom. And I do think it's sort of like a flipped classroom, if you've ever had those, where Miss White, who's an exceptional math teacher at Selwood Middle School, does this, where she does a video of her lesson. So she teaches the lesson on video, and that's the homework the students watch the night before. And then when they come into the classroom and are interacting with her, that's when they can ask questions and she can reinforce the ideas. That's sort of similar to what our students will be experiencing, in that they'll have the synchronous online in the morning, get the lesson, have the lecture, and then when they show up at the classrooms in the afternoon, we'll be able to engage, ask questions, do small group activities and other things. Mm-hmm. So I think this will be excellent for our students as we continue to move back towards a full 5-day reopening in the fall.
I appreciate all three of you amplifying that message.
All right. If there are no...
I was about to use the same flip classroom analogy.
I actually think I stole that from you, Scott. You said that to me the other day, so I'll give you credit for that.
But you had a great example of a teacher actually using that. My little bit of experiences as a teacher was it was in those non-lecture moments and oh my gosh, I hope nobody's lecturing for 90 minutes. But it's those non-lecture activities, whether it's an individual processing and trying to apply what the teacher had set out, or small group activities, that's where somebody's brain really gets engaged and where the concepts really start to sink in.
I just want to say I appreciate the conversation as well. Just learning how we're approaching this return.
Question about the CTE classes, or sort of any of the hands-on classes. What would those look like?
So, I mean, those students, obviously this is a big advantage for those students who are able to come back and have, opportunity to work with the equipment. Many of those teachers have been very creative throughout this pandemic and have been going into their classrooms and doing demonstrations for students. So for the students that stay at home, it will look much the same as it has looked the entire year. And for the students that come back, they'll have just more opportunity to interact with equipment for their courses that that they would in a normal school year. They'll just be physically distanced, is all. And I think, if you've all been visiting schools and you see that it looks remarkably similar, it's just kids with masks on, but they're still, teachers are still teachers and kids are still kids. And when I was a high school teacher, nobody wanted to listen to me for 90 minutes. That's for sure. So, you'll see it will be very similar if I were teaching today. What I will be doing in that classroom will be very similar that in the non-pandemic time, because people will be masked up and socially distanced.
I guess the last question I have is middle school sports and then high school extracurricular activities and sports for families. What will they see that will be different starting next week, or will it just be in person? Will be sort of dovetailing or feathering into what's already been happening?
I I do not have information on that that aspect of the day. I can get information to you about that. Unless
somebody else gets the fun stuff.
Yeah, somebody else gets. Oh, let's see. I might be getting some information right now. No, not yet. Season 3, I'm told, starts now for the competitive sports. But for middle, you're asking particularly about middle school sports, right?
I was asking both.
Oh, high school. So season 3 starts now for high schools, and it will be after school activities for middle school and high school, after school activities. I'll get you a real answer. I'll get you a thorough answer. I'm just getting this by text, so I'll get you a thorough answer and send it to you.
I'm all for real answers. It's fine. I'd love to hear.
Great.
Go ahead, Andrew.
I'll be really quick, Scott. I just wanted to thank the superintendent and staff for the update. It's again, good to see all the work that's going into this, and I'm excited to get middle school and high school kids, back in our buildings next week. It's a huge milestone. And Superintendent, I really appreciate your comments about planning for a full reopening next fall. I think that's really important. That's certainly my expectation, is that we're going to be working towards that and doing everything we need for 5 days a week. And it's been a long time, and I think our families need to understand that we're planning for that as well. So really appreciate that, and happy to do whatever we can to help support that moving forward. So thank you.
And it is amazing how emotional the sight of a school bus can be.
sure.
And the kids, just the kids walking by, you know, on their way to school. I hadn't seen that in a year. It's wonderful.
So real quickly, throughout this process, board members from time to time have raised questions about special education. So if we could get just a little bit of a more in-depth report on that going forward. I just want to say, so in one of my virtual school visits a month or two ago, that was one of the rooms that an intensive skills classroom I dropped in on, and there was great instruction and learning going on there. But to just get a more system-wide look at what's happening there would be great. And I guess the other question I have is recognizing that COVID infection rates are, while increasing, are still at a fairly low level, but the difference seems to be at least more detected cases among young people, particularly teenagers. Does that make a difference in terms of how we're watching the metrics and how we're thinking about this going forward?
I would only say directly, Director Bailey, is, you know, we're continuing to rely on our public health officials, OHA and county officials. We're as interested as anybody in keeping a close eye on what that looks like. I think you all heard the caveat from me earlier, assuming the conditions continue to improve, that this spike at the moment starts to subside, that the guidelines from the Department of Ed make it permissible. You know, we are planning for a full reopening, but we also know that COVID, you know, impacts, you know, our young adults, you know, perhaps a little bit differently. We're still learning about it. We hope the vaccination becomes more broadly available to young adults, which only helps, you know, protect our community and our schools' campuses. So I don't think that we could offer any more specifics about tracking age groups per se in the area.
Okay, thanks.
I have a general question. I'm not sure this is the point in time to ask it, but it seems like we're on the COVID bit. How is it that parents will know whether there's been a COVID case? And I know that there is a very strict protocol and communications within the cohort. But you know, I know when my 3 kids were playing sports or just, you know, in sort of different venues, so lots of cross-pollination across schools, depending on what the activity was. And so is there some sort of dashboard, or what's the transparency just in relation to where we've had cases, other than if you're in that school, in that cohort?
It's a good question, Director Brim Edwards, and some of you are already familiar. The Oregon Health Authority publishes a pretty transparent case by case, school community by school community in the state of Oregon listing. But I'll let Dr. Brown speak a little bit more about how we're trying to maybe make that a little bit more accessible for our local community here.
Yeah, clearly, you know, as we're moving back into in-person instruction, you know, parents in the community are going to be interested in what's going on at their school and what's going on in the larger community. So we're working on building a dashboard as we speak that would support that, so parents and, again, the larger community would have a sense of what's going on. As the superintendent said, we're working with our local health authority, and the local health authority is right now, you know, when a case is identified, is quarantining the entire cohort to take the most sort of aggressive stance to limit the spread of COVID in our schools. And so we've been working with them, and they make those determinations as to what's going to happen in terms of the outcome for the cohort at the school. And again, working to create a dashboard that will make that public for our community.
Thank you.
And I've asked this in an email, but I want to ask this publicly. When we learned that staff members have been come in contact with a student who has been tested positive, are we offering them a COVID test?
I'll jump in if staff is. The tests are available for those, and correct me if I'm wrong here, staff, for any adults that are exhibiting symptoms, they have that option to take the rapid test on site. If we don't have folks exhibiting any symptoms, then they wouldn't necessarily take it.
Well, and I'm not talking about mandatory. I'm talking about offering that as an option. Certainly, if I were a staff person and found
Sure.
out, I would at least want that option. The tests cost money.
Sure, Chief Martinick.
Good evening, board. Thank you, Director Bailey, for the question. So what we currently have is we have testing options for staff or students who are symptomatic or experiencing symptoms. So if a staff person has been in close contact with a confirmed positive case and they are experiencing symptoms, we are offering a test for them. We aren't able to provide the test to non-symptomatic staff or students. So we would make sure that we are finding them resources so that they can get a free test either through our school-based health centers or other places. Currently at, I think it's the convention center, they have like a drive-through rapid testing. So there's a variety of different places that we would send people if they are concerned but not showing symptoms.
And do we cover the cost of those tests?
Those are free.
Those are free. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Chair,
I feel like I should, are we finished with the COVID Lippy hybrid report, Superintendent Guerrero, or is there more to come?
If there are no further questions, we can move on to our next agenda item.
Excellent. That is our resolution regarding continuous improvement and student achievement. So Superintendent Guerrero, would you like to introduce this item?
I would. Thank you, Chair. So let me try to set the stage here, and we have a few slides where we're going to have Dr. Brown walk you through. But let me start by saying Oregon, like other states, recently submitted a request to the U.S. Department of Education to waive all standardized tests for this year. This plan was initially denied, but then the department approved a revised plan for Oregon. However, it's our recommendation that we not participate in state summative assessments this spring. We remain committed to accountability and the importance of data and helping us to continuously improve and understand the needs of our students. And in keeping with this commitment, we provided a mid-year measures of academic progress or MAP assessment for students in grades 3 through 8 this school year. And as you heard earlier, we're also offering the SAT this month. But given that we're just now welcoming students back inside classrooms after more than a year in distance learning, we don't think it makes sense to use the limited in-person time we have with students to administer the SBAC tests. We think the data that we would receive from only a predicted small number of students who might opt in to take the SBAC, even if we went through all the logistical preparations to proctor this option, it wouldn't be meaningful to assessing system performance across the district. So instead, it is our recommendation that moving forward, we proceed with instituting a fuller balanced assessment calendar this coming school year, including administration of the MAP assessments in the fall and the winter of 21-22 school year in grades 2 through 8 in both reading and math, in order to establish baseline data and inform the learning recovery for our elementary and middle school students. We would also plan to participate in the full battery of SBAC tests next school year to be in full compliance with Division 22 in the coming school year. So here to speak a little bit further on the topic with a few slides to provide directors with some more details is Dr. Brown again.
Thank you. Next slide, please. And I'm going to beg your forgiveness because I think the superintendent was quite eloquent in how he put this, and I'm going to be somewhat repetitive. This is the first time in my career that I have ever stood before a group and advocated not to participate in an accountability assessment. It is sort of runs counter to my being. PPS is clearly we're committed to continuous improvement, and that work requires a balanced assessment system. Something that I've been advocating for, something that I was have to say I was really honored and pleased that the board adopted goals that focused on growth and focused on explicitly on closing achievement and opportunity gaps for students as we move forward, students of color in particular. I think standardized assessments are an important component of a balanced assessment system, both on an interim basis as well as a summative end of year basis. That being said, PPS has a long history in terms of having some guiding principles and thoughts around assessment. And I have seen these sort of replicated in other places as well. One of which is, the purpose of an assessment needs to be very clear. I'm going to introduce one, which I have carried with me. It's not part of the PPS world quite yet, but I want us to start to infuse it. That is the idea that the value of the data that we gather from assessment has to exceed the value of the instructional time that's given up for it. The mechanics of an assessment matter. Assessment's part of instruction and shouldn't take an overly large portion of the instructional time to do it. And then finally, probably the most important thing is assessments need to be fair and support equity. They need to help us reduce opportunity gaps for students as we move forward. I think all of those principles are in question when we look at the SBAC at this point in time. And I think we're in a very unique space. Next slide, please. So why opt out now? In terms of clarity of purpose, if we're honest, the primary purpose for the SBAC is really accountability. It is to meet the federal accountability requirements and to help the federal government and the state government understand how to align resources to schools. We all know that the federal accountability has been put on hold. So the primary purpose for this assessment doesn't exist this year. Second piece, in terms of time and data, as the superintendent just mentioned, we're just beginning hybrid. Each of these assessments would require at least 2 class periods to be able to complete. In a middle school where students would be required to take 2 tests, this would require a whole week of instruction. In high school, this would take a whole week of instruction to get through this. Again, why on earth at this point in time would we use our limited instructional time for a test that's really designed for accountability purposes? Next slide, please. And then more troubling in terms of the data and meaning of it. This is not the same test. It doesn't measure the same grades. It's not the same test. So you'll see there are holes in the subjects and grades that are being assessed. But in addition to that, the assessments themselves have been changed. That is, it's a shorter blueprint. They've taken out the performance-based tasks in the assessment, and they've shortened the computer adaptive component of the assessment. This test is not the same test that was given last year, and it won't be the same test given next year. I will tell you, under ideal circumstances, and I've done a lot of test development in my career, under ideal circumstances, equating assessments when blueprints are changed is very difficult. Equating assessments when blueprints are changed and you have an incomplete representation of the student body, impossible to do well. Next slide, please. So again, when looking at those data and time limitations, the reduced number of assessments per grade is a bit of a challenge for me, because then we can't look at changes in reading and math over time. I can't compare third graders to fourth graders to fifth graders in the progression, because that progression doesn't exist in the test scores. You can't look at cohorts. It also precludes doing growth analysis. And I think when we talk about equity, growth analysis is the foundation of looking at whether or not we're closing opportunity gaps for children over time. I mentioned earlier, again, that the assessments are reduced in length, but again, not the same test. It interferes with comparability from year to year. I saw this quite explicitly with the Park assessment when I was in Maryland. It was quite evident. We were able to demonstrate, and we actually published articles about it. Next, and finally, participation would be limited. We could offer it in hybrid, but not in distance learning. The test isn't meant to be delivered in a remote fashion. And we're expecting likely higher opt-out numbers. And that is a problem as well as we move forward. Next slide. So why opt out now? And I'm just gonna bring it together, and I'm actually gonna quote from the state superintendent's letter to the federal government. While I continue to question the value and wisdom of administering statewide summative assessments this school year, and have significant concerns regarding the validity and possible misuse of data collected from these assessments, I also want to reiterate 3 concerns that I believe are unique to Oregon. And again, they align to what I've talked about before. There is not a lot of public support right now for doing this, and I think that aligns to a lack of clear purpose for the assessment. The timing is awful. Again, we're just returning to in-person. Again, to quote Gil from his letter, in-person needs to prioritize and center on teaching and learning, community building, reacclimating students to school, and relational connection. In effect, Director Gill was quoting some of the principles that we have advocated for all year. Having kids come back and sit down for assessment or give a week of time for assessment at this point in time just doesn't seem to be a fair balance of the use of time. And then finally, there's a considerable concern, and Director Gill outlines this as well, that this will actually add fuel to the opt-out fire. That in the long run, as we're trying to build a system of standardized assessments, formative, summative assessment model that is well integrated and balanced, we need folks to understand the value of assessment and where that fits in. I think it's hard to argue for the value of assessment if you don't take a stand when it doesn't make sense. And so for all these reasons and more, this, I hope, is the first and last time in my career that I ever feel the necessity to advocate not to participate in the state summative assessment. And I take comfort in that the resolution clearly articulates our plan to implement a full balanced assessment model in the next year, including full participation and compliance with Division 22 and all assessment requirements going into the next year. Thank you.
Chair and directors, there you have background and our thinking and recommendation as you consider Resolution 6287.
Thank you, Superintendent Guerrero and Dr. Brown. Do I have a motion and second to adopt Resolution 6287, resolution regarding continuous improvement and student achievement?
So moved.
Second.
Director Constant moves and Director Scott seconds the adoption of Resolution 6287. Is there any board discussion?
I want to first thank Dr. Brown for such a thorough and absolutely compelling presentation. I mean, you really had me at the impracticality of administering it, given how little instructional time, especially our middle and high schoolers had. But the other points about just the value of the assessment data itself and the fact that the test itself is designed for accountability purposes, and we've already taken that hook off. I mean, really, really very compelling. And I appreciate you reiterating a few times that we are a district that has made a strong effort in the last few years to focus on student achievement. And we can't focus on raising a student achievement if we don't know where our students are. And I appreciate all the effort that went into administering the MAPS testing, even while in remote learning, and to our educators who persevered with that, and to our families who made it happen at home. But I think it's kind of a moot point. I would, after other people have an opportunity to weigh in on this, I would like superintendent or perhaps general counsel Large to just briefly assess what you think the risks are for us in terms of defying the federal expectations that are on the table.
Let's just have Superintendent Guerrero answer that question now, Director Constam, about what we do think the risks are of this action as far as the federal government is concerned.
It's a fair question. Of course, when you say it that way, Director Constam, define, it's a different situation. I would be right there with advocates. Had we been open most of the school year, or our state didn't shut down, we would perhaps want to participate in the summative, but we're just returning to school. And of course, we're also concerned with what might be, what might be the infraction or the sanctions or the consequence. We would not want to place the organization's interests at risk here. So what we know is by not having participation, that we would not be in compliance with Division 22. So that would be something that we could not report for this school year as being having met that requirement. We would have to engage in a corrective action plan, which would likely mean participating in all subtests of the SBAC next spring. So we also, Chief Russ Brown and I had a direct conversation with Director Colt Gill as well to ask the same question. We have not heard of any indication that we would be placing federal resources or any further state action at this time. But I'll let our general counsel and Dr. Brown add to that if they'd like.
I think you've covered it. I mean, the most likely path is that this ends up with a Division 22 non-compliance area, for which we will prepare and execute a corrective action plan, which is administering the test in the next year. The way the funds flow from the federal government gives funds to the state gives funds to the local education agencies, the school districts, and the path for non-compliance is already spelled out. The Division 22 process is well worn and well documented. So we think that will be the most likely path. And we have also, in addition, we've done due diligence on that issue through a number of sources.
So even if we went through the logistics of affording that opportunity for probably a limited number of students who would want to show up on a day to take exams all day, I don't think most districts in the state, even if they have an opt-in option, would meet the 95% participation rate. So frankly, everyone would be out of compliance with Division 22.
I am planning to vote in support of this resolution. And I agree with what Dr. Brown said about, it's important for us to know where we stand. It's important for us to have data so we can make system shifts. I think we've seen that very clearly in both the setting of our board goals using data around growth. This is, and the SBAC and other tests like this are an important piece of our toolkit as we continue to live into our values at PPS. And yet I think with all the things Dr. Brown said this year about how the test has been changed, about the lack of time students have been in classroom, about the cost to that time, that instructional time, I don't think there's any responsible way for us to administer the test this year. So I will be voting yes to this resolution for those reasons, and because of the the conversations we've been able to have about what the ramifications may be. We can't guarantee, but I think we can say the odds are that this will be a benefit to our students not to do it this year, so that they can continue to adjust to that classroom time. And I think that's the student-centered approach that I'm going to take tonight.
So I'm going to support this as well. I just they're not really questions, but just looking for sort of confirmation or maybe reinforcements. So, you know, when the SBAC results arrive in August, it's not super helpful anyway to parents. So I look at like who needs that information, and I kind of put it like 3 different categories. I think teachers, by and large, know where their students are, so check. Second, parents. So parents this year to know, and I think there's a fair amount of concern from parents of with the shift in just the way students learn, that you know, their students at grade level. And so Dr. Brown, the way the parents the best way for parents to gauge that versus getting some test results in August would be both the teacher assessment, obviously, of where a student's doing, the regular ways that happens. And then also the district is mailing the maps, the winter maps results to every family. So, and that there's going to be some sort of parent workshops or way in which parents can to help parents interpret what those results mean. Is that?
Yeah, those results have actually been mailed out to parents already.
Okay.
And I know a number of schools have already set up workshops, and we're talking about additional workshops as we move forward. And you know, again, from my seat, what's going to be really important is that first assessment in the fall to establish that baseline comprehensively across all our students in grades 2 through 8. That's the real anchor for that. And obviously, you know, in our secondary schools right now, we have students who sat for the SAT today, and we'll be sitting again on the 27th.
And so like the third group of individuals who might have used the SBAC data is district leaders and principals for, as we look at next year's budget, whether it's budget and programming, whether it's for the summer or for the fall, of, you know, where we may need to focus resources. We would have two sets of map tests from last year. So for me, it would be helpful to get a sense before we dive into the budget process to get an overview of sort of what you all are seeing, what sort of insights you think that tells us, so that we can use some of that to inform our decision making and our thoughts about the budget, which I'm sure the budget that we're having presented to us, we'll have that incorporated, but as somebody who would be looking to connect the data with what we're funding or focusing on would be great.
And if I could, I just want to put a teaser out there, because I am going to come back and talk about the map assessment. I want to remind folks that last year we presented data that showed how strongly the map assessment was aligned to SBAC performance and how well it did in terms of predicting how students performed on SBAC. I know there were lots of questions about whether or not the results this year would be reliable. Interestingly, when I take the first pass at the data I'm looking at, the correlations between this winter map administration and last year's winter map administration are all above 0.8. It was a very highly reliable administration, even though it was done remotely, and everybody had a level playing field on that. So some of the concerns that were articulated just didn't show up in the data, or we wouldn't have those correlations. So I think we have a very reliable basis to present data to help inform the decisions that you're talking about, Director Brim-Edwards.
Great. Well, I'm all for more instructional time and less testing this spring.
I appreciate the remarks, Director Brim Edwards. I think you spoke to a few things. One, it is our desire to build a culture of assessment literacy, and it's important that stakeholders use that information for different reasons, whether it's lesson planning or school improvement plans or central office supports or resource management. The resolution is continuous improvement. It isn't just, these more standardized dipsticks. We had actually really another good conversation with PAT leadership this morning, in fact, around taking a more broad view, a more holistic view. What would it look like if there were district-wide writing prompts? There was a time when teachers were very involved in meeting together to calibrate around what students were demonstrating, say, in writing skills. What would it look like if we incorporated those into a balanced assessment calendar? We've talked previously, if we're working towards a vision and students demonstrating those skills and dispositions, what does an authentic assessment or a portfolio or an exhibition look like as a capstone in 8th grade, but also at other grades? And so I think there's a big opportunity here as we implement our assessments in the coming school year to continue those conversations, go back to some of the work that was done previously and what was good about those, and helpful to educators. And then how do we create sort of indicators of our students' progress towards that graduate portrait as well? So lots of room for us to really grow in this area, which is actually exciting.
Okay, any further discussion before we vote on this matter? Director Bailey?
Yeah, I'm going to support the resolution. I'm really disappointed that the state's petition was turned down by the federal government. I don't get it. I'm very supportive, was very supportive earlier this year of us doing the MAP assessment, because that gives us not only system level information, but also school level, classroom level, and student level usable information for how we can change instruction. And we can agree to disagree about the value of the SBAC. I understand with current regulations, we have to do it. I still don't see, and again, Dr. Brown, using your criteria, I don't see the bang for the buck for the time spent on that, but we'll leave that for another day. And I'm really happy to hear, Dr. Brown, that the map that we gave has the results look very reliable for this year, and that will really help us going forward in that budget process and planning for next year, and with the resources, how to best allocate the resources from the federal government that we're getting. So that's just a real win for us. And I'm really excited to hear about that. Again, getting teachers together back to really calibrate their in their classroom assessments, their more informal assessments. That's been a big source of inequities across this district, is that teachers have different expectations of students in the same school, in different classrooms, and across the district. And sometimes it's a wider variation within a school than it is across the district. And it will be, as we talk about a school system, it's having the same expectations on grade level for all of our kids across the district that's going to help move the needle going forward. So again, very happy to vote yes on this resolution.
Yeah, I'll just quickly echo the comments of the superintendent and staff and my colleagues. I also will support the resolution. I think what I really like about it is that it reinforces the district's commitment to data and accountability, and particularly the important role that data plays in our efforts around equity and serving our Black and brown students. And there's a great op-ed by National Urban League and Unidos US sort of talking about the importance of that. And I think it reinforces our commitment to that, while also understanding, balancing against the reality of the pandemic and where we are, and particularly where we are, here in Oregon and in Portland Public Schools. So I think it's the right move, and I appreciate you bringing it forward. Thanks, Superintendent.
All right. If there's no further discussion, then I think we are ready to go ahead and vote. But Ms. Powell, first, is there any public comment?
There is not.
All right. The board will now vote on Resolution 6287, resolution regarding continuous improvement and student achievement. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
Yes. All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? Resolution 6287 is approved by a vote of 7-0 with Student Representative Shu voting
Yes.
all right, thank you. All right, now we get to something that I know my 10th grader has been long awaiting, the 21-22 school calendar. And tonight, this is just an informational presentation. Directors and members of the public have a chance to ask questions in the next 2 weeks, and then we'll be bringing this back for conversation and vote at the meeting, the next meeting, which I will probably say the date wrong again, but I think it's April 27th. At 6 p.m. on a Tuesday. I got that down. Superintendent Guerrero, would you like to introduce the calendar?
Yes, that's correct. We wanted to give directors a chance to hear some of the key features of next year's proposed school calendar. You'll recognize some of the factors that we've continued to try to integrate, and Deputy Quare will walk you through the usual stakeholder engagement that went into this, but we also wanted to give a couple weeks to hear feedback and input from directors and any other community as well. And I know we're being joined by Daniel Kogan, who's been our lead, our staff lead on this annual exercise. So we want to appreciate his continuing to figure out how to incorporate all our requirements that we put forth. So Craig?
Thank you, Superintendent, and good evening, directors. Thank you for this opportunity to share this informational item about the proposed 21-22 school district calendar. As we know, per board policy, annually, we always come to the table to present the informational item before we do vote on it. And we will be voting on this proposed calendar at the April 27th board meeting. The recommended calendar is an important first step for both internal planning in the district and, of course, what our board chair said. I know that the public is definitely waiting. When is the start time? When is school starting? And so we know that families are anxious to start planning. So this is good information, no doubt. As the superintendent did share, the staff did go through a process that engaged multiple stakeholders, including PAT, PFSP, PAPSA, and in various district departments and representatives from numerous school PTAs to help make sure that we were including all of the very important basic elements that usually go into the creation of this calendar. The recommended calendar for next year includes many of the same features and considerations that we have seen in past calendars, such as ensuring that we have 5 full instructional days in a typical week, ensuring that we are keeping teacher planning days on Mondays or Fridays to make sure that we're avoiding student breaks in the middle of the week. And also the goal of it was also to ensure that semesters and quarters have a balanced number of instructional days, which has always been typical of our calendars in the past previous years, which is, for example, quarter 1 having 45 days, quarter 2 with 45 days, quarter 3 with 43, and quarter 4 with 44 days. We also wanted to make sure that our calendar followed all bargaining unit contracts, which is included in the agreed upon provisions per the ratified PAT contract. And of course, very, very, very important for every academic calendar that we do push forward is also ensuring that we meet the required instructional time with state standards. And just a real quick recap, the required instructional hours as requested by the state for K-8 is 900 hours, for grades 9 through 11 is 990, and grades 12 is 966. And this proposed academic calendar does meet that very important requirement. So with that being said, board chairperson, that is the proposed academic calendar. Again, we are proposing that we are starting pre-Labor Day on September 1 and the last day of school being June the 10th.
Thank you so much. We are going to take questions at the via email unless there's something that a board member feels like needs to be said in this moment. ahead of that opportunity to email in questions.
I just have a quick question about the February 22. There's a possible snow day listed on a national holiday. I didn't know if that was a mistake. That was President's Day.
Isn't that part of the bargaining agreement?
That's correct, Director. To pass February 21st is a Monday. That's a President's Day holiday by our collective bargaining agreement. If we've had a bad winter and we want to incorporate a makeup day for the inclement weather, we would notice our members that we would be converting that to a school day. If it's not needed, then it is a holiday.
Excellent. Thanks for the clarification.
So just along that lines, I know some school districts, even before the pandemic, had really stopped having snow days. They just turned them into distance learning days. I'm wondering, now that we know how to do that, is that something that's being considered, or are we still just doing the traditional thing of having snow days and making them up and having that 5 a.m. call being made? And
Is that a question we can have answered via email? Because I think that's a bigger sort of conversation about equity and who has access to devices and how we think that might play out. So is that okay if they respond to that via email, Director Brim-Edwards?
Yeah, although because of just why you raised that, I'd love to at least have it be answered at the next meeting. But I guess you have 2 weeks to prepare.
Come up with a good answer, Craig.
Director Brim-Edwards, absolutely. We will be prepared to answer your question at the next board meeting.
Thank you.
I think we already had an example this year of how we're going to handle that.
That may be popular.
Mr. Kogan, I feel like since you're here, you should at least get to say something. So did you have anything to add tonight?
My birthday falls on June 10. And so, it's coincidence that the last day of school is June 10. That's probably happened a half dozen times in my life.
All right. Well, if we all remember that, we can wish you happy birthday on the last day of school next year. Any other questions in this moment before we move to our email questions about the calendar?
Just given climate change and weather patterns, I'm more worried about smoke days in September than snow days in the winter, sadly.
Yeah. We're going to start seeing Santa Ana's.
Chair Lowry.
Going back to our, when we were doing the vision process and what seemed like the crazy scenarios of Portland being a center for producing basically gas masks so people could run around and get their exercise in the middle of,
wildfires.
Really bad smoke days from fires down in Ashland or wherever.
Director Constam, did you have a question or comment?
I was just going to say that as we prepare this resolution for our consideration and vote in 2 weeks, I'd like to include something in the recitals that reiterates the superintendent's commitment for next year being, a full-time in-person school year, just so that it is embedded in the calendar and we communicate that to parents.
Excellent. Director Constam, would you work with the superintendent on that ahead of the meeting so that that's in the recitals?
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you so much.
And it'll include the caveat that I gave earlier, which is not in our control.
Right. Obviously, if state metrics dictate that we cannot have school, then we need to follow those. But I think as many of us have seen from the projections that it looks like, as continued vaccinations happen, that would be a very low chance of that occurring. But we will follow the state health metrics and the state law. But open 5 days. Go ahead, Andrew. I know you're going to say something there.
Well, I wasn't actually going to, but since we keep bringing it up, I actually think the board should have a discussion at some point in the future, and it doesn't have to be when we adopt this calendar, although I support Director Constam's, language, but about what that means, given a lot of different scenarios. And I think, the state has not, prohibited in-person school, and there have been lots of districts in Oregon that have. been able to have in-person school for a long time. What it dictates are space and, you know, teaching and cohorts and social distancing and masks and all those other things. So for me, it's an issue of, I think we need to look at what are all the potential, or at least not all, but, you know, the most likely, you know, scenarios come fall, and how can we ensure a full-scale reopening in a variety of different scenarios. I think that's going to be important, because I will just tell you that personally, I cannot give up another even, you know, month of school for our kids come September. I think we have to figure out a way to do it regardless.
And I agree with you. I think the only reason I would not be willing to support going back 5 days is if we had another shutdown like we had in March of last year, you know, that very early shutdown when everything was closed because of, you know, the regulations from the state. But I do think, you know, we're at the point where with the restrictions we have now, that we will be able to find a way to reopen 5 days.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure anything's possible. We could have COVID-20. Hopefully we won't.
Right.
That's exactly why we should have the discussion sooner rather than later, so that we're looking at the criteria and like what might be barriers, but have that conversation now versus the summertime, and, you know, be hoping and wishing that something happens when versus having planned out in the spring.
Yeah, I think our plan at this point is to open high school and middle school, and then, you know, as we begin the conversation about the budget, really begin to talk about what do we need to do to open for full 5 days in the fall, and look at those different scenarios. And I know that that conversation's begun in lots of small ways, but that'll be a more robust conversation as we begin to really look at the budget.
Let's just be careful not to jinx this, folks.
Right. Wash your hands, wear a mask, get vaccinated when you can. All right. Any other questions or comments before we close out this conversation about the calendar and Mr. Kogan's birthday on June 10th?
Just hi, Daniel Kogan, and let's put in a little plug here for all of our unsung heroes in our district who've been toiling away behind the scenes, making things happen. Nice to see you.
Thank you so much. All right. Well, as we said, the calendar will be back for vote at the next meeting. Board members, please get questions in. Craig will be looking for that. Deputy Superintendent Guayar will be looking for that response to Director Brim Edwards' questions about snow days and Director Bailey's question about smoke days on that session next week, or in 2 weeks. Is there any other business at this time before we adjourn? All right. The next regular board meeting will be held on April 26th. This meeting is now adjourned.